Hey guys! Today we're going to be talking about episode 6 of his Dark Materials, The Demon Cages. While this episode was definitely action-packed, I feel like it might only deserve a B+. We saw an incredible scene between Mrs. Coulter and Lyra that had a tremendous amount of emotional weight to it, but aside from that, this was probably the only episode that made me question whether the show was really directed for adults or for kids. I thought it was a little bit softer than it needed to be. I thought the fight scene at the end was definitely weaker than it needed to be or should have been. And I also noticed a distinct lack of blood for how much death and violence we were seeing take place. This episode begins with Lyra being taken by a nurse into the heart of Bolvangar, and Lyra finds herself in the cafeteria. It doesn't take her long to realize that Roger is indeed there, and the two do a great job pretending not to know each other while their demons discuss what's going on. This is very faithful to the book, and I noticed that the production team even had the photograms of kind of a tropical sunset on the walls. I really liked the kind of weird hospital prison vibe that was going on. One of the mysteries of the series is solved when we see Dr. Cooper in the flesh, and we notice that she is actually the one with the fox demon. She summons this girl, Bridget McGinn, to what we will find out is intercision, and we can see Bridget's terror on her face after Bridget very reluctantly decides to come along with Dr. Cooper and the nurses. We have a strange moment when Bridget has entered the room with the doctors and Sister Clara is waiting outside in the hallway. She goes from having a pretty blank, kind of pleasant expression on her face, and after she hears the sounds of the machine happening, her face turns into this very muted look of horror and terror. And it seems clear that Sister Clara is maybe reliving some trauma that she herself has experienced. As in the books, Lyra is being asked to partake in the research that's happening at Bolvangar. We see the younger doctor of Bolvangar taking lots of pictures of her and looking like he's measuring something. She goes ahead and confronts him and asks him if he's measuring dust. He's very clearly taken aback by this, says, "Where did you hear about this?" And Lyra very quickly backpedals and says something about how she washes regularly. She tries to throw the doctor off the scent, and it kind of works. She is not one to back down, as we know though, and then she asks the doctor why they sever kids from their demons and why they're trying to kill everyone. The doctor says that Bolvangar is not a child chop house and tries to brush away any concern that Lyra has. He's growing increasingly frustrated with her because she's not really staying still. In the middle of this, the fire alarm goes off. Lyra scrambles out of the machine where she's being photographed and joins the other kids to put on their cold winter clothes and head outside to take attendance. Lyra sees this as a great opportunity to talk to Roger freely without the adults overhearing her. She goes over to where Roger is standing while the adults take attendance, and she informs him about the Egyptians coming to Bolvangar and the escape that will be happening very soon. She also takes the opportunity to turn this into a diversion. She realizes that 50 kids throwing snowballs at each other and at the adults is going to cause general mayhem and chaos, her specialty. Of course it does, and she and Roger sneak out, and she asks Roger where the hell the exit is. He's not quite sure, but they eventually manage to make their way to a place that has been restricted to the kids, and they realize after going in and finding to their horror a bunch of cages that this room is where the demons who have been severed from their humans are kept. This is really a hard scene to stomach, and I think they did a good job. In the book, Kaisa, Seraphina's snow goose demon, is the one that helps them enter this building and free all of the demons. That doesn't happen in the series, and Roger and Lyra don't actually free any of the demons here. But they do look at all of the demons and realize just how horrible this is. And we do see on several of the demon cages the information of the human that they were connected to. We see Bridget McGinn's very sad looking rabbit. We see another kid with a very sad looking dog, and then they finally get to Billy Costa's empty demon cage, and Roger asks what the hell happened. Lyra, of course, knows that he died, so she tells Roger that Billy has died and she found him and tried to save him. I would have loved to have seen Kaisa help the kids rescue the demons. Maybe that was above their special effects budget, but I definitely noticed it, and I wanted there to be some kind of resolution here. especially since the episode itself is called The Demon Cages. In another slight departure from the book, Lyra and Roger then find another room, and though they don't go in, they can see that the kids who have been severed from their demons are basically laying in bed, repeating numbers in unison, and they're barely conscious. This is not something that we see in the book at all, and we're kind of led to believe in the book that after the kids have been severed from their demons, the doctors at Bolvangar release them. That's how Lyra eventually finds Tony Makarios, who in the series has been replaced by Billy Costa. The kids don't have the wherewithal to help the severed kids at this point, but we can see Bridget McGinn, poor Bridget McGinn, with her head shaved, and all of the kids look very forlorn. Lyra and Roger know that they have to get back, otherwise they'll be missed. After things have settled down with the fire alarm, we see Dr. Cooper enter what must be the doctor's lounge, and she says, "Are we drinking yet?" Dr. Cooper is clearly obsessed with her work, and she toasts to the freedom that they will be having soon and the completion of their studies. Her younger colleague that we saw measuring Lyra for dust doesn't quite share the same enthusiasm, and he expresses his great moral hesitations about what they're doing, all of the pain they're causing to the kids, and the fact that some of the kids are dying as a result of the experiment. Dr. Cooper is pretty quick to tell him that it's just pain they're causing and nothing more. The younger doctor asks Dr. Cooper how many kids will have to die before they get it right, and Dr. Cooper responds by saying, "We are doing what is necessary. We get this right, and we will truly free generations from the tyranny of sin, and the magisterium will recognize and celebrate us for the job we've done here." I really liked the scene because I thought it was a nugget of what religious fanaticism sounds like, and also the intersection of science and religion and how the boundaries between them can sometimes not be so clear. I think people who are completely obsessed or devoted with their work, whether it be religious or scientific, can sometimes forget that what they're doing, what their singular vision is, does involve many, many casualties. We see Dr. Cooper do that here. She is so taken with the idea of removing sin from society, removing choice from humans, that she doesn't realize what she's doing is actually just killing kids. I also liked that this was a very direct reference to what I know and love to be Philip Pullman's bigger message here, that experience is so much more important and more valuable than innocence, and that growing up, making those choices, having those impulses, discovering who you are is really the point of human existence and what makes us such thinking, feeling, creative creatures. We move very briefly back to our world, where we see Will Perry sitting on his bed watching old video clips of his dad being interviewed about his expedition to Alaska. You can see if you check out the caption on the video he's watching that it's a BBC News video, that he's participating in the 2006 Ice Core Challenge. We don't hear much of the interview, but we do hear John Perry talking about his son and that he's told his son where he's going, and in some way his son is taking it a little bit better than his wife. Will doesn't have much patience for this, and he quickly gives up and walks out of the room in what might be frustration or disappointment. Mrs. Coulter arrives at Bolvangar in her Zeppelin, and we see both the girls who are in Lyra's dorm scramble to get things together, as well as the doctors at Bolvangar struggling to please Mrs. Coulter and appease her expectations. She is all business all the time with them. The doctors are clearly very scared of Mrs. Coulter as well, and they tell her that they've made great developments with the project and they have a new separator. The separator is especially efficient at what it does. Mrs. Coulter is excited by this, and her being the creep that she is, says that she would like to see the separator in action. Mrs. Coulter then goes to the girls' dormitory. Before she gets there, the girls are trying to figure out what they can do to make sure that one of them isn't chosen for intercision, and Lyra very honestly tells the girls that she needs their help in hiding her from Mrs. Coulter. She is very afraid of what will happen if Mrs. Coulter finds her there, and she tells Annie, who's definitely the ringleader of the girls, that Mrs. Coulter is her mother. I thought Annie, whoever this kid is, was a great actor. In my opinion, she actually looked a lot more like Lyra than I think Daphne Keane does. As I've harped on before, Lyra is supposed to be a blonde in the book, and she's also supposed to be a bit younger than Daphne Keane. She's supposed to be around age 11. I don't have any bones about Daphne Keane. I think she's doing a very swell job, but I did notice that this girl who's playing Annie was also great. Annie tells her that they understand, they'll do their best, and that Lyra should definitely hide under one of their beds. Mrs. Coulter does enter the girls' dorm, and with a nauseatingly, sickeningly sweet voice tells the girls how happy she is to see their shiny, happy faces, and she touches a few of them in what I'm sure she thinks is a kind and motherly way. She tells the girls, "Well, girls, you've kept yourselves perfectly. Not that I expected anything less." I am not exactly sure what this means. I don't want to make any weird, gross assumptions that she thinks that they have somehow spoiled themselves or advanced to puberty more quickly than she liked. I was sure that this was some kind of weird sexist moment, but I'm not exactly sure how it is supposed to pan out. Definitely not comfortable, probably not appropriate, and I did not like it. We do see the golden monkey walk around the room this entire time. He looks like he's smelling. He's trying to find someone who might be hiding, and luckily he does not find Lyra, who is clinging to the top of the underside of the bed for dear life. When they finally leave, everyone sighs a communal breath of relief, and then Mrs. Coulter pops back in, just to troll with everyone, really. All this time, the Egyptians are struggling to make their way to Bolvangar, and we see them crossing a mountain path with all of their equipment, all of their stuff, and all of their people, and it looks quite perilous. We see some great Egyptian teamwork with Lee Scoresby helping. Back at Bolvangar, Lyra tells the girls in the cafeteria that she is actually there to bust them out of the station and that the Egyptians are coming to help them. The girls are very skeptical, and Annie is very frank in saying that there is nothing but ice and snow and possible death outside of the station, so how could she possibly want them to go? Lyra is pretty insistent though and says, you either have this or you have intercision. Your demon is going to be cut away from you. Which would you prefer? Moments after, Dr. Cooper and Sister Clara enter the cafeteria and summon Lizzie Brooks, which is, of course, Lyra's stage name for this moment. And we see the color pretty much drain out of Lyra's face as she realizes that she might not get to the escaping part because she is about to go through intercision herself. It is a scary moment, and certainly one that Lyra has not planned for. In the book, Lyra has been at Bolvangar for at least a few days, and after hearing that Mrs. Coulter has arrived, she decides that she needs to do some reconnaissance. I believe Roger and Billy tell her that there is plenty of space above the ceiling. This crawl space ventilation system through Bolvangar could be a great means to move around the station undetected. Lyra hauls herself through all of this ventilation until she finds herself right above where the doctors of Bolvangar are discussing their plans. She or Pan makes a small sound, and the doctors basically yank her out of the vent and decide that she knows too much, she's a security risk, and the only thing that will really shut her up is intercision. In the book, she kicks, she screams, Pan attacks the other demons, or at least he tries to, and Lyra bites the doctors. There's definitely quite a bit of struggle and violence in that, and they kind of shove her into the machine where the intercision takes place as a punishment. And Mrs. Coulter hears the commotion, realizes that it's Lyra inside of the machine, and Mrs. Coulter herself is the one that yanks her out of that. This is not how it played out in the series. I don't think the differences were too huge, but I did appreciate how much in the book Lyra struggled, and I would have liked to have seen a longer struggle and maybe some fake blood to make it as intense as I think it should have been. One thing that we do see in the series, which I appreciated, is that after Lyra tries to escape, the younger doctor picks up Pan and holds Pan, and we have this sudden and very strong sense of repulsion, that this is something that is not allowed and that some great boundary has been crossed. Something very sacred and deep has been breached. And the doctor himself seems to feel this too, because as soon as they get into the room where the machine is, he literally throws Pan. We see Lyra go limp as soon as the doctor puts his hands around Pan, and we know that this is very wrong. Lyra eventually shakes off the shock and the bewilderment that she's feeling in the moment, and she starts screaming. And we see her in this cage, pressed up against it, saying that they can't do this to her. The younger doctor responds and he says, "Please don't make such a fuss. It's not even going to hurt." Lyra continues screaming, saying that Mrs. Coulter is her mother and that they absolutely cannot do this. Mrs. Coulter would not allow it. And the doctor is really listening. He says to Dr. Cooper, "Should we actually continue with this? If what she's saying is true, we probably shouldn't continue." Dr. Cooper is in her deep religious fanatic moment and says, "We're moving along with this. Carry on as normal." Dr. Cooper tells Lyra that she's doing something great. She's a part of something great. She should just try to focus on that. Mrs. Coulter hears Lyra screaming and says, "I thought you'd gotten this under control." When she hears Lyra screaming "mother," something clicks in her brain and she realizes this is Lyra, this is her daughter, and if she doesn't act quickly, something really terrible is going to happen. So she shuts the machine down and she waits as the doctor and one of the nurses free Lyra and Pan from their cages. It's definitely a dark moment of reckoning, and we see Lyra and Pan walk towards the glass where Dr. Cooper and Mrs. Coulter are watching all of this. This was a great cinematic moment because you can see that Lyra's reflection in the glass is kind of next to Mrs. Coulter and the golden monkey, and it's this moment where they're both so close to each other and so far, and they're about to have a very serious conversation about what is happening at Bolvangar, but more importantly, what their relationship is to each other. Mrs. Coulter takes Lyra back to her room at Bolvangar and tries to give her some chamomile tea to calm her down. Lyra is rightfully very suspicious, and we see them kind of glaring at each other for a few moments, while Mrs. Coulter tells her that if she were going to poison Lyra, this would probably not be the best way to do it, and that she's giving Lyra this chamomile because her own mother gave it to her when she was upset. She tells Lyra that she was probably quite an emotional child, and we hear plenty of disdain in her voice when she says this. It's one of the few times when we hear her being pretty direct in her self-reflection. The irony of Mrs. Coulter talking about poisoning Lyra was certainly not lost on me, and we should see Mrs. Coulter poison Lyra for quite a while a little bit later on in the series. Mrs. Coulter asks Lyra who told her about her relationship to Mrs. Coulter, and Lyra very defiantly stays silent. She says Lyra must have so many questions. She didn't give up Lyra because she didn't care for her. She gave her up because she thought it would be best for both of them. To be frank, she was not equipped to be a mother at the time, and because Lord Asriel had all kinds of ideas of what he wanted to do with Lyra, she thought it would be best to go along with whatever he thought would work. I actually thought that this is one of the rare occasions when Mrs. Coulter is being pretty honest, or at least as honest as she can possibly be with herself and another person. And I was kind of touched at how realistic this sounded to what I imagine are very difficult conversations between mothers and children who have been separated for years and years. Despite her shortcomings as a mother, Mrs. Coulter also slips in that she did save Lyra and implies that Lyra should be pretty grateful for rescuing her from her intercision. This brings it all back to who Mrs. Coulter is as a character for me. We see her having this incredibly honest, raw moment with her daughter, and then she, through and through, continues to be a complete narcissist. Mrs. Coulter says, "Dust is not a good thing. Grown-ups are so infected so deeply that it's too late for them, condemned to a life of sin, guilt, and regret." Projection much, Mrs. Coulter? When Lyra calls her out on her bullshit and mentions that kids have died for this experiment, Mrs. Coulter chimes in that every boundary in experimental theology requires the sacrifice of the few for the many. Once we've ironed out the teething problems, this will change the world. She has that same kind of religious fanaticism and singular vision that we saw in Dr. Cooper earlier this episode, and that we've kind of seen in Lord Asriel in the beginning of the show. This, again, was an echo to me of just how similar Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel are. She is convinced that she is here to change the world, and that what she's doing, ugly as it may seem when we're zoomed into it, is really for the best. Lyra continues to blame Mrs. Coulter for Billy Kostas' death, and Mrs. Coulter tries to wash it away by saying, while that was unfortunate, Lyra really needs to understand how impossible and difficult that this job has been. She says, "This is what I can give. This is my calling, and I am sorry if me being who I am has done you damage." Mrs. Coulter is really here an evil, shining diamond of narcissism and a bit of a sociopath. She has no concept that what she's doing has any broader negative impact or could be anything but extremely important for the entire world. She's also completely fed up with all of her good work not being recognized for the genius that it is, and she's especially tired of her no-good daughter giving her shit. While she has Lyra here, she asks Lyra about the alethiometer that the master of Jordan College gave her and says that the master probably gave Lyra this so that she could get it back to Lord Asriel. She says that can definitely not happen because Asriel will not be using it for anything good, and Lyra should probably give it to her instead. Lyra says, "You saved me," and tells Mrs. Coulter that she will be staying with her. Mrs. Coulter is so desperate for this validation and for this forgiveness that she perceives in Lyra. Lyra goes ahead and puts Mrs. Coulter's hands on Lyra's face in a gesture of closeness. She tells Mrs. Coulter that yes, she has the alethiometer, and she gives her a box, a tin box, that has been soldered shut. As soon as Mrs. Coulter opens it, the spy fly that Lyra has stolen from Farder Coram breaks loose and attacks Mrs. Coulter. This is Lyra's chance, and she gets up and dashes out the door, and she grabs a fire extinguisher and starts bashing in the controls for Mrs. Coulter's door. We see Mrs. Coulter realize what's going on, and as she tries to leave out of the door that's just been locked, she howls and screams. Lyra is on the other side of the door, howling and screaming with equal fury. And I loved this because we kind of got a likeness to the golden monkey demon from both of them. Pan finally tells her enough is enough, we gotta go, and Mrs. Coulter is left in her room. Lyra goes ahead and sets off the fire alarm, which is the indication to all of the kids that it is time to get the hell out of there. She runs into Roger and tells him that it is time for him to go rescue the severed kids. Lyra and Pan head to the room where the severing machine is, and they overload the system and destroy the machine, and in part also destroy Bolvangar. Roger gives a pep talk to the kids who have been severed, who are repeating numbers endlessly. I didn't care for this scene, kind of a weak inspirational quote time, a bit like the Egyptian pep talk that John Faw gave towards the beginning of the show. Mrs. Coulter follows her golden monkey demon into the next room, and we see him climb through the ventilation system. Mrs. Coulter follows him, and this is kind of a cool echo of what happens in the book when we see Lyra going through the ventilation system. Lyra doesn't do that in the series, but Mrs. Coulter does instead. And it's also a great reminder that this is how the golden monkey navigates Mrs. Coulter's apartment. So of course Mrs. Coulter has these weird monkey skills as well. And when she jumps down onto the desk, she really does look like the golden monkey. Just when things are looking pretty bad for the kids who are trying to escape Bolvangar, the Egyptians show up. We see many of the staff of Bolvangar fall dead, along with the Tartars who are protecting it. I wasn't quite convinced. The timing of the Egyptians' arrival at Bolvangar was a little bit too perfect. Also, there was absolutely no blood in this scene. I found this very, very weird. And this was really the moment when I wondered if maybe the BBC has different regulations for shows than HBO, because this is a joint venture between the two. Perhaps BBC is marketing this towards a younger audience. We also see Lee Scoresby and Yorick arrive on the scene, and they are both trained, very skilled killers. They've both been to war before, and this is not something new. We also see Serafina. She does some high-speed assassination. After this very short battle dies down, Roger emerges triumphantly with all of the severed kids. There's a sense of sadness around them, and also the surprise and horror and reality of what's been going on at Bolvangar. Mrs. Coulter is observing all of this from behind a slightly ajar door, and we see tears in her eyes. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be her expressing some kind of remorse or disappointment or sadness that her project is being destroyed, or maybe she's realizing the impact of what she's doing. maybe she's having some kind of moral moment when she realizes that she's a terrible person. It's really left very unclear. Kostas tells Lyra that she's done an amazing job and she really should leave now and pursue her other mission in the north. And that mission is really to save her father, Lord Asriel. Lyra needs a little bit of convincing, but she eventually agrees, and we see her and Roger get into Lee Scoresby's hot air balloon along with Urek. Serafina comes to join Lee Scoresby while the kids and Urek are snoozing on the balloon, and they have a short conversation about what Lee's part is to play in all of this. This was one of my favorite scenes in the book, and I have to say in the book it did have a bit more gravitas. We do see Lee tell Serafina that he's concerned that he's gotten into a bit more than he can chew. Serafina tells him that he's got to pick a side and that he is definitely on the side of this child, Lyra. Lyra is really the end-all be-all of what is going on with the world right now, and Lee Scoresby has been fated to be her protector. He doesn't really handle that news very well and seems very apprehensive that she is in his care and that so much depends on him. Serafina seems a little bit more convinced and says she's glad to have Lee in this role. After Serafina leaves, we see Lee Scoresby's instruments on his balloon go haywire, and after some investigation, we finally get to see cliff ghasts attacking the balloon. Both Urek and Lee spend some time defending the balloon from them as they try to attack. At one point, Lyra, in her quest to stay away from all of the action and the gunfire, hits something wrong and ends up sliding out of the balloon, and as she's trying to hold on for dear life, she just can't do it, and she slips and falls, plummeting to we don't know what yet. This is how the episode ends, and it's definitely a bit of a cliffhanger. Just a few quick parting thoughts. I thought this was a very dynamic episode, and we certainly saw a lot of action. We also saw a lot of things wrapped up. This seems like the end of the Egyptian involvement in the series, for now at least. Aside from the scene between Mrs. Coulter and Lyra when they're talking about their relationship, I wasn't very moved by this episode, and I think some of the smaller adjustments they made to the plot kind of gave it a little bit less impact than I was looking for. I did really appreciate the interesting commentary we get by way of both Dr. Cooper and Mrs. Coulter on the nature of sin in the series and what sin and experience have to do with each other, how important childhood is for the Magisterium along with innocence. I'm so looking forward to Lyra finally meeting all of the bears on Svalbard in episode 7. Thank you again for watching. I so appreciate you. I hope you're having a great week, and see you soon.